First published in 2019 and with a follow-up book arriving in just a few days as of this recording, Judges is an anthology collection of short stories set in the universe of Judge Dredd before the judge system was fully implemented across the nation. The stories include The Avalanche by editor and interviewee Michael Carroll, Lone Wolf by George Mann, and When the Light Lay Still by Charles J. Askew, and I hope I've pronounced all of those gentlemen's names correctly. Being an anthology collection, the stories are rather short. They chalk in all under 200 pages, but that doesn't stop the interesting characters, setting, and plots. Most specifically, I found The Avalanche and Lone Wolf to be my two favorite, and When the Light Lay Still, I couldn't even finish, but we'll get to that in a moment. The world of Judge Dredd is one that I'm none too familiar with. I have seen both of the movies. I did prefer the Carl Urban one as opposed to the Sylvester Stallone one, but I've never really read much of the comics. But having said that, I've always sort of known who Judge Dredd is, having grown up reading comics such as Spider-Man, Spawn, and all the other popular books from the early 90s. I was fortunate enough to be of the teenage years when that big boom in comics was going on. So I'd always heard about Judge Dredd, but never really read any of his books. However, I will say after reading this anthology collection, I am now interested and am eagerly awaiting the arrival of my order of Judge Dredd, Book Year 1 and Year 2, as well as Judge Anderson Year 1, which these are all anthology books. And when I say books, I do mean books. These are not comic books. There are no pictures. And I'm only bringing that up because I have seen some negative reviews on websites from people who purchased these books thinking that they were getting comic books and were very disappointed and even slightly irritated when an actual book showed up in the mail. Starting off the collection is editor and interviewee Michael Carroll's The Avalanche, chalking in at 141 pages. Set in the year of 2033, it begins when Judge Leandros, a first recruit of the judge system, arrives at her hometown to reunite with her family as well as patrol the area and assist the local police force in the transition from police force being the authority to the judges being the full authority. Keeping this spoiler-free, I will say that soon after, Judges Deacon, Rowan, as well as a few others arrive shortly after her and then soon find themselves in the middle of a murder investigation. I found this story to be particularly interesting, first off, for the world building as well as seeing the judges have to work side by side with the local police force who are on their way out and they know it. So the conflict that naturally arises between some of the police officers and the judges was fascinating and engaging to me. And it really kind of put me in this position of, okay, if this was really going on, whose side would I be on and who would I support? And honestly, at this point, I just don't know. But it's a good premise, it's a good setting, and I like the fact that it takes place not so far from our current timeline year of 2020. Again, staying spoiler-free, I really enjoyed the character of Judge Deacon and Judge Leandros, as well as Deacon's entire unit. I found the story to be one that I wish had gone on for quite a bit longer, to be honest with you. It seems like it was intended to go on past the 141 pages that it lasts. And I'm only saying that because there's a certain subplot in the story that just comes to a sudden end at the end of the story. And you could tell that Michael Carroll was really fighting to wrap that up without rushing it because he wanted to expand it a little bit more. At least that's the impression I get. And I would have liked to have seen that subplot expanded a little more because it was set up for something bigger. I won't say that the ending of it was disappointing, but I will say that it did feel a little bit rushed. Checking in at 113 pages, next we have George Mann's Lone Wolf. Set in the year of 2034 and starring Judges Ramos and O'Shea, the two judges find themselves working side by side with the police force again during the transition period from police authority to judge authority. They are on the trail of a lone serial killer who has decided to dress up in a homemade judge's uniform and who executes punishments on those who have done him wrong. This is a great mystery. It was solid pacing all the way throughout. It was very interesting. Lots and twists and turns. I liked how this one was more of a detective story than it was an action story, and you could say the same for the Avalanche, really. But it really did keep me engrossed and engaged, and I started it, and then 2 hours later I was finished with it. I didn't even take a break. I was just so engrossed with the story. The characters were excellent, the setting was good, and the same for the Avalanche as well. Really, the whole book. But this one especially is probably top-tier storytelling as far as I'm concerned. And finally, rounding out the book at 170 pages, the longest of the three, we have Charles J. Askew's When the Light Lay Still. Starting out in the year of 2033 and then jumping ahead to the year 2038 and starring Judge Jones, I cannot tell you anything about this because of the three, this is the one that was hard for me to read and I didn't even finish. I made it maybe 25 or 30 pages into it. And the reason for that is not because Judge Jones is an uninteresting character or that the story was not set up in an interesting and fascinating way that would catch my attention. No, I loved the premise of it. I loved the character of Judge Jones, how he's established and how he's set up. My biggest problem with this story is the sudden shift from a third-person perspective to a first-person perspective. I've never been a fan of novels that change perspectives frequently, and this one does that, and it is so annoying to me. I just could not get through the story. I sat it down, brushed it to the side, and I do not know what happens in it or how it ends. I can only tell you that the setup is strong, Judge Jones is interesting, and I liked how he came to be into the judge system. I wish it would have been different, but I just could not bring myself to finish it, and I tried. I really did. So, let me know if anybody did finish it in the comments below. I'd love to know your all's take on the story. This is far from the first book set in the Judge Dredd universe. In fact, there have been several released in the early to mid-90s as well as the early 2000s that focus more on Judge Dredd and the Mega City 1 timeline that readers of the comic book are well familiar with. This is a book that caught my attention because I was interested in the world building of the Judge Dredd universe, again having been a fan of the Carl Urban movie and being well familiar with the Sylvester Stallone movie. The anthology approach is perfect as far as I'm concerned. I like having a different set of characters coming in. You can argue that the tone of the book stays the same throughout all three stories, or at least the two that I read it did, and I have no complaints about that. I enjoyed the tone and the pacing equally in both stories. All in all, I think you get a lot of value when you purchase this book. I would like to point out that these are all individually on sale for the Amazon Kindle, and a sequel is soon to be released. I do not know at this point if any characters from any of these stories are going to carry over, but I do know that I have pre-ordered mine. It is the first book I've ever pre-ordered, and I cannot wait for it to arrive in my mailbox in a few days. If you're looking for something to kill the time and help you escape from whatever the fuck is going on in this crazy-ass world we live in, I highly recommend Judges Volume 1. You've been great. I've been Winter, and I'll see you on the next one.